Thank you all so much for being here for our panel discussion, Strength Through Diversity, Accessing Capital and New Markets. Today's panel discussion is all about farming with the future in mind, building a picture of the ag world that we would like to see here in Central Illinois in the next several years, and dissecting how we get there. So we've got an amazing group of panelists, and I'm going to serve as moderator. So they're going to have a chance to kind of say their thoughts, talk amongst each other a little bit, but you are encouraged to participate. We all want to hear from you. When you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll let you shout them out, and I'll repeat them for the recording, and the panelists will answer them, and we're just going to operate this very conversationally. So the economics of farming are becoming more and more challenging, as we all know. We've got depressed commodity prices in the conventional system that have been unsustainably low level for several years. And I personally know a lot of farmers, and several of them are in the room, who are feeling financial pressure and wondering how they will make money farming again, how they're going to make a living, how they're going to be able to afford raising a family on their farms. And as we've explored this morning, ecologically, farming has contributed to soil erosion, wildlife population loss, ground and surface water quality issues. Regenerative agriculture offers many solutions, both to these economic and environmental concerns, one of which is diversifying crop rotations. But if you grow a more diverse crop rotation, where are you going to sell it? Are you going to be able to get the money you need to make the investments into infrastructure and to the growing season for that crop? And so our panelists are going to explore those elements, the elements that we need to put in place to open up room for farmers in Central Illinois to grow a more diverse set of crops. So welcome to our panelists. I ask that each of you share a bit about your background and explain the part that you play in strengthening the economic and environmental outcomes in agriculture through diversifying crop rotations. So I will just quickly let you know we have Ritter from Flanagan State Bank. We have Will Glazik, who is an organic grain farmer and crop consultant, as well as distiller. We have Gurda from Pipeline Foods, which is a grain supply chain company, and we have Dave Miller with Iroquois Valley Farmland, REIT, and thankfully all of them already did a nutshell, so we know kind of your personal passions, but talk a little bit more professionally about what you offer to diversifying crop rotations in Central Illinois.
Some of the things that I wanted to talk about were some of the pitfalls that I see when people come in with organic plans, and why some of them fail. The first thing is lack of financial information. I see this as an agricultural problem right now. Everything is focused on production and not about profit and bottom line. And we need to go back to school on a lot of those things. And I have a lot of people that basically that's probably the best thing if you're a young person getting started, take some business classes. Second, find a good lender. One of the things when I did my studies on who was financing organic operations, I came to a very kind of a question or response that came back that bothered me. Most people could not find a lender to work with them. And they were financing their operations with family money, credit cards, personal loans. And that is the worst thing you can do for a business. Nobody keeps you accountable. So make sure you find a good lender. 3, inform, educate landowners, family members, and landowners. 4, this is another big problem, financially prepare for transition. What does that mean? You're going to lose money during transition those 2 years. Make sure that you got some money saved up. Then determine how many acres and what crops you're going to raise. Most people see the dollar signs, they get excited, and they want to transition more than they can handle, and they don't do a good job. That is a problem. Another problem I'm starting to see is don't overpay to get land to farm. Why? Because you have to transition it, and you make it twice as hard to cash flow those first few years. Okay, this is important to me. Have a mentor to work with. Organics is a totally different farming practice than conventional. So if you've had, somebody that's been through and done this successfully, make sure and get involved even if you have to pay them. That's a big deal. The next item I have, start small, do a good job. Why is that important? Everybody in the country is going to be watching what you're doing. If you do a good job, you'll have landlords come talk to you. If you don't, every neighbor in the country will tell everybody not to rent you a farm. And one of the common things that I see is everybody around me can tell you every bad organic field in our area, but they don't know the good ones because they can't tell any difference. And that's a big deal. And that's why it's so important to start small, do a good job, build on it. If you try to do too much to begin with, you're going to run into weed problems, you're going to run into crop production problems. Join organic support groups like Will's and some of these others. It's amazing the exchange of ideas. That is quite an asset and something that is very important on organics. Organic farming needs to be profitable. I agree, I'm a banker. But you must have a love, you must have a commitment, and you must have passion for what you're doing or it's not going to work. This is not something you're going to switch overnight just to be profitable until conventional prices come back. And that's a big deal. Organic farming is more different than conventional than alike. And you almost have to change everything that you're doing. But there are a lot of differences, and I see a lot of benefits, and it's getting us back to the basics. You will need storage in organic, but these are just some common things that I see. That maybe that's a little different than what I was supposed to say, but I want to make sure that you're aware of some of these things. A lot of times we learn by our mistakes, and I've learned a lot in my career, and still learning. So we'll go through this if you have questions. I brought some pamphlets back here. If you're grain farmers that go through the numbers on transitioning and different crop rotations, the biggest thing is finding good information to make good decisions and take it out. So go ahead, Will.
So I'm a second generation organic farmer, and whether you're a certified organic operation or just looking into a low input system, a lot of this is going to apply. So to make the system work, for it to be profitable and for it to be ecologically adaptable, you need to have a multi-crop rotation that includes small grains and winter annuals. Now, right now, markets say that organic corn and soybeans are making a lot of money per acre. Then you have to average out your net with the less profit per acre on the small grains. And we might raise 2 to 3 small grains, including wheat, oats, cereal, rye. We're starting to raise some barley. And I'm kind of greedy. So I wanted to get my small grains to be just as profitable as my corn and soybeans. So I started looking for other markets. And Dave Bishop talks quite a bit about finding the 85% markup from the farm gate to the retail. That takes 85% of the work to get it. So what we started doing was, on our wheat, we worked with some local breweries. We built relationships. I sent out probably 50 emails and I had one reply. It is selling yourself and selling your farm and your ideas, but it takes that relationship to build a connection. We've been selling to Old Bakery Beer Company now for 3 years. We have a phenomenal relationship. They come up to the farm, we hang out, we have dinner. And then from there, we started our own distilling company. So we don't actually own the distillery. We work with Stumpy Spirits, and we contract them to run our recipe. So it's our grain. Then we hire them to run it. We'll go down and bottle it, and then bring that back up here to Central Illinois, and then sell direct to consumers. So we'll do tastings at a grocery store or a liquor store or bar and tell individual people our story and get them to buy a glass or a bottle or however. And that takes a lot of work, but that's exactly how I can farm less ground and leave an open spot for another person to come in and farm that land. And really, I want to be able to make $100,000 on 160 acres. And I can't do that selling bulk loads of grain. I have to do that through diversification and multi-crops, as well as livestock and other income streams, possibly honey or trees. When you really get down to looking at it, there's a lot of opportunities there.
Will, I just want to let you know, we have your slide you had asked for, and this is kind of getting at what you were saying just now. Do you want to kind of point out what's going on there?
So this pyramid is what I don't know, the diversified marketing scheme where you can have 5% of your grain production go into a super high value added product like our vodka or whiskey. But that's a very low percentage of production for a really high percentage of value for margin. Underneath that, I look at organic bulk loads of food grade grain, whether that's corn or oats, soybeans. Those go to companies and like Cliff Bar. They're buying bulk loads of food grade oats, would be a great example. They're paying a higher margin for higher quality, but it's still bulk loads. So that's going to be maybe 25% of the production and only 30% of the income. And then everything else, everything that doesn't hit food grade or premium grade can be moved as feed grade for livestock. And this is probably going to represent the bulk of the production, but by far the lowest margin per bushel. So I think as we move forward, everyone wants to go to the top. That's going to be the most profitable, no doubt, but it's the most work. And if people can find a place in and along this pyramid, or all three, that's how we can maintain success.
Thank you, Will. Anders.
Amen. So the pyramid that was just up, I think the simplest way to think about let me get this closer, what Pipeline Foods does is that we are the bottom two. So we buy from farmers food and feed, and we sell to folks like Cliff Bar and also Horizon and other kind of feed consumers, right, in that way. A lot of poultry producers. So Pipeline Foods is a relatively new company, been around for about 2 years at this point, so we're still kind of young babes in the woods when it comes to the grain world, which means that there are also growing pains, and it means that we are also constantly reiterating and adapting and open to suggestion. We're not going to get everything right the first time, but we want to get everything right as much as we possibly can, and we do that through listening well. So again, part of what I'm doing here today. So the most recognizable part of Pipeline is that we buy and we sell grain. We have facilities. We've invested in assets. We are not brokers. We are merchants. We take ownership of the grain, share that risk, elevate, and distribute. But on either side of that very recognizable part of the supply chain, we have two programs that are a little bit different than most others. One is the Farm Profit Program. This is a part of the company that I work within. And I've met many of you through something called OGrain, the Organic Grain Resources and Information Network, resources, tools, education at UW-Madison. So I started and managed that for a few years. Why I bring that up is that what I do now at Pipeline is kind of like bringing an OGrain, which was funded by the USDA and held within the university, bringing that to within a company. So kind of re-engineering the way a company works with growers and the resources we can provide to growers. So the FPP, Farm Profit Program, is consultation, agronomic certification consultation, educational materials. We have a podcast and video series, and are working on a transition guide. So things that many others are working on, including Mallory and Will and others. And we also are working together on other projects that are outside of this conversation. And the FPP is also where this kind of gets into this conversation about accessing capital, new markets, diversifying rotations, is that we have financial tools. And one of those financial tools is a long-term offtake agreement. And so that's where we commit to buying all production off a certain number of dedicated acres from a farm, and that farmer commits to selling those to us with an annual reset in terms of what crops should be grown agronomically and what the market can bear. And so in that way, we get access to, as Will said, the corn and the beans that we need, which are our bread and butter. But then we are also working and partnering with the farmer to be able to market that third crop, that fourth crop, that fifth crop. So it's a way of kind of sharing value between farmer and company. And this is something we've rolled out with maybe about a dozen farmers at this point. Again, young, but we want to be able to roll out with many more moving forward. And the long-term offtake agreement can also go a long way in terms of accessing capital. What a lender wants to see is proven market, proven income, and so we can actually show cash flows and enterprise budgets to lenders to show that they have a definite market, they actually have a signed contract for that market. So it's a way of being able to kind of backstop and securitize a loan for a lender, and we're working with a couple third-party lenders to work out how to make a relatively low cost of capital available to growers, but we haven't yet really cracked that nut, very honestly. And so we're continuing to work on whether it's a transition loan or the need for capital to invest in equipment or to purchase land. We're still working on that and want to work much more closely on that. The other thing I'll just kind of close with that has to do with the Farm Profit Program is that one thing I'm getting very, very excited about is the idea that we as a company in the Farm Profit Program, we're intermediary. I used the word translator earlier, right? So between the grower and between the buyer, the CPG or consumer packaged good company is the industry term. So we can translate between those two parties. And so we can bring the voice of the farmer, the data basically, or the story from the farm, pull that through the supply chain and put that into the heart of a brand, whatever brand that is. And I'm not going to surprise anyone when I say that brands are increasingly very, very interested in learning more about the farm where their grain is coming from. And so we're working with Cliff Bar and others, and we have identity preserved supply chains. So we're pulling through a characterized supply chain. So these growers are using this many cover crops, these growers are using these practices. We can pull that through using a survey, simple questions and answers, and then the grain is the commodity, but that's not all that the brand is buying. They're also buying the information from the farmer. They're also buying and interested in and hopefully paying a premium for the practices that the farmer is actually engaged in. And I think this has repercussions for regenerative as well as organic. You know, right now we're mostly working in organic, but we're increasingly working more in non-GMO, other clean label. And so we're also really thinking creatively about how to collect more of that data and how to partner with farmers to be able to kind of recalibrate the thinking that you don't just have a commodity, you don't just have a product, what you have is a story and information, and you can also monetize those. You can also bring value, not only to your land through those practices, but also through the supply chain and through creative marketing with folks like Pipeline, and more importantly, and somewhat, honestly, more lucratively, through your own storytelling, as Will just said. You know, so Pipeline Foods is likely not going to be a partner for 100% of your acres if you're following the strategy of the pyramid, which is a solid strategy to be able to diversify. Diversification in all things brings resilience, and it's no different when you're thinking about what you're growing and what markets you're accessing. So just a couple thoughts leading into the conversation.
Thank you, Anders. David.
So usually I spend time talking to people about regenerative capital. And the reason is because without a secure capital backing you up, then all this diversification, all these healthy changes, are for naught. So I think it's important to understand who's providing the capital when you're signing onto a lease, or even, maybe to a lesser extent, a mortgage. And we have investors in 40 states. We have our tenants, 70% of our tenants are millennials. And we're reaching out to small investors. So, what the hell is going on here? One thing's for sure, that you're sitting in a monster opportunity that's going to run for generations. And it's just getting started. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I remember back in the 50s growing up, in what I call the dead soil monoculture, and it's still pretty dead. So this is a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous health opportunity. I was very excited to see a group of doctors from the University of Illinois. Our co-founder is a medical doctor. This is all about health. It's economics, of course, you have to survive. But at the end of the day, this is about your kids' health. It's about your grandchildren's health. Diversification is critical. So if you're secure enough as a farmer in the land that you have, you can take risks, right? You can build a fence. Maybe you can set up a organic processing mill. You can go and talk to distilleries. Let's see, Will's having some of this product there. Anyway, so this is what's going to happen. The pendulum has swung too far to a monoculture. and it's swinging back now. It's got nowhere to go. So, this is tremendously exciting just to be here, and I think, still on really the cutting edge of this change that's going to happen. So diversification, organic is just the beginning, right? There's a process. Farmers are only going to take so much risk from the get-go. You're not going to probably start converting 1,000 acres, on day one. And baby stepping is not a bad idea. It's risk diversification. So as a company, we've been baby stepping for 12 years now. And it's a good thing we did. I think we'd probably be out of business if we didn't, because we have a lot of young farmers. And the good news is that they're all trying to diversify and set up their own businesses. This is a wonderful thing. We may be mostly millennial, but we're also mostly third or fourth generation. And that's why we're still in business, frankly. So we are all about family farmers. We really don't impact institutions. We don't trust necessarily any of our capital base. So that's why we spend a lot of time teaching our investors to be in it for the long term. So we started from the get-go wanting to have generational impact. And be able to say to the farmers that we want you to have that land indefinitely. We want you to pass that on to your next generation. And you better be able to back that up when you speak like that. So, once again, that's why for 7 years we told our investors there's no exit, you've got to build trust. Without that, there's nothing to build on. If you don't have the farmers' trust, you have nothing. So you've got to get that in place. And we're still working on that after 12 years. So, one thing I would say is make sure that if you're going to go out and get land from whoever, you make sure you're going to have it for a while, right? Because there's nothing sadder than to bring the soils back to life and have the land where you want it to soil and your business where you want it to be, and then lose your lease. That is devastating. So we work very hard to never have that happen, and we hopefully never will. The only way we can do that, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, is go to small investors, and lots of them, all over the place. Because that creates liquidity, and that creates what I would call is the hopefully lease. We try to avoid the hopefully lease, which is that you can have the land for a fixed term, and then maybe you can buy it at the end of the lease, or hopefully, more capital will come in and enable you to continue to lease that property. So, make sure you have your eyes open when you're out there, diversifying and starting your business.
Thank you. Between the four of you, across the breadth of your knowledge and your professional expertise, you guys have everything there to be able to give a beginning of a idea of where farmers can begin. So I've got some ground. I want to start diversifying my rotation. What crops should I start considering, and what are my first steps? Yeah, go. Will, yeah.
Are you certified organic currently, or you're looking to diversify?
Looking to diversify.
So you first got to look at markets and what kind of volume can be raised and put into a market. If you're conventional, obviously you can move corn and soybeans. If you're organic, you can move corn and soybeans. Conventional, there's markets to bulk load wheat in this area. Other areas you can bulk load oats. If you're interested in going beyond that in central Illinois, you're going to have to do a lot of bootstrapping and a lot of legwork to raise another crop that you can move direct to restaurants or a feed mill, maybe raise your own livestock. Barley in particular makes a great hog feed, but no one raises it around here. So I first look at how many acres you're thinking of doing, where the markets are, and how much work you're willing to get out and hustle. If you want to start raising grain and selling to a brewery or a distillery, breweries can handle a lot of grain, but not near as much grain as a distillery. But people buy more beer than they do liquor. But liquor's shelf stable, so if it all doesn't sell, at least you got a lifetime supply of liquor. So, to answer your question, I would look at how many acres you're thinking of moving to a third crop or fourth crop, where the markets are, and how much profit you'd like to make. And then decide how much work you're willing to put in to make that profit, and then come up with your answer.
So Anders, where are the markets right now?
Good question. So I think that we are a small part of a much larger supply chain, so we can speak to a part of the market. As I said, we're the bottom two, right? And so corn, beans, and wheat, we definitely buy those, and talk to me if you have them to sell, right? So those markets are available. I think, as Will is pointing out, the markets for the less kind of commoditized small grains are still emerging, right? And so if we, depending on a sale we have on, we have bought oats, we have bought barley, we have bought some ancient grains, right? But it really depends on the market being there, and those markets are just really not stable or consistent on a large scale at this point. And so I think there's also, I'll address kind of a common misconception, right? And that would be that someone like Pipeline Foods, we can solve this issue by just buy more oats, Anders, buy more barley. That would be really easy, and that'd be wonderful, and I would love to do that. But we serve at the pleasure of those who we sell to, right? To the food companies, and then ultimately to the consumer. So it's thinking about Artisan Grain Collaborative and educating consumers about the fact that their bread can have more than just regular bleached white flour in it, right? So it's a chicken and the egg situation, and the solution is also somewhat chicken or egg, right? So the markets for, again, the commodities are stabilizing, I think, in terms of price and in terms of the availability of those grains. But when it comes to those a little bit more niche third, fourth, fifth crops, it's still emerging, and at this point, it likely is a little bit more sweat equity put in by the farmers to be able to find those local markets if possible. But then also, I would say, and I would encourage, if you have those crops, you're thinking about growing them, still talking to us and telling us about it and saying, hey, I have a bin of this, or I will be putting in 30 acres of this. And the more we hear that, that means the more that we see a little bit more of a production signal. And that means that we will look harder for a market signal for that. And that means that we can kind of communicate that up the supply chain. Whereas those who we are talking to in the larger food companies, they're not saying like, go get us more emmer. We need more of that. We're not yet hearing that. And there are smaller companies thinking about Plow, which, longer story there, but the kind of promise was that they'd be able to help scale up and find those markets a little bit. So, long meandering answer, but.
Okay, I was just going to say I would probably look at a 3-tier approach. I don't know how many people remember Lawrence Welk, but he used to go a 1, a 2, a 3. Okay, my first phase of this would be looking at a mission statement. Okay, anytime you're going to raise something unique and different, set up a mission statement. Why is it going to be different? Why are people going to want to buy it? How is yours going to be unique in the marketplace? So you got to put a plan together, and as you start writing a mission statement, that's going to be your business plan. The second thing, in organics especially, we have 2 phases. We have transition and we have certified. Transition, what you want to look at, how many acres can I convert over with the equipment and the labor that I have, with landlords that will accept it, number 1. And number 2, what is the least amount of money I can lose during those first 2 years? You're going to lose anywhere from $100 to $300 an acre on a lot of growing crops. So I mean, one of the biggest issues, and I've already mentioned it, is people want to transition too many acres on the wrong crops. And it depends on several factors. It depends on weed control, it depends on fertility in those farms, and what has to be done. Once you get through transition, then it's a new ball game. You can sit down and say, what are my markets? What do I want to specialize in? Most people around here want to make sure they've got corn in there. That's a home run. Hay is a really good crop, but some of the other crops to fill in the gaps those other years is up to you. I see some people that basically want to say, I want to put corn every other year. And that scares me because The whole idea of what we're talking about is soil quality, adding organic matter, and improving what we're doing. We're kind of getting back to conventional and worrying about profit over having good stewardship practices. But I mean, there's some things that you got to look at. There's a lot of considerations. That's why I'm a mentor. I put together a lot of numbers. The other things you got to look at is what kind of insurance can I get on some of these products? What are my risks? When I go into a bank or a lender and say, hey, I'm going to be raising these products that you're not used to. Okay, they're going to say, do you have crop insurance? What kind of yields? Where do you go for markets? Do you have storage? So there's going to be a lot of questions that you're also going to have to address.
I'd also like to point out that if you're interested in raising a different grain on your rotation, and you want to change something, that change needs to start with you. And if you want to raise oats and buckwheat, then when you go buy bread, make sure you get something with a whole oat bran in it, or buy oatmeal from a local supplier. When you go sit down at a Chinese restaurant, ask for buckwheat noodles, and they probably don't have it, but if you keep asking, then they're going to contact their supplier. Their supplier is going to contact the miller. The miller is going to contact their wholesaler, and ultimately it'll start a chain reaction to encourage more production of those small grains that you're looking for. Or if you go to a bar, you could always ask for some Downey's vodka.
I think your question, Mallory, about diversification, right? And so I think taking a step back just from thinking about diversification only in the terms of what crops you're growing, I think also thinking about diversification of the labels that you are seeking, or therefore the markets that you're seeking, right? And so I think a lot of people who are transitioning, they can kind of assume that organic is an all or nothing game, that I'm transitioning 100% of my acres or I am not. And I'll just say, and this is maybe a divisive topic, but that some of the most successful and innovative farmers I have the pleasure of spending time with are parallel operations. They're still managing conventional and they're managing organic fields. And they've been that way since the early 90s, right? So it's a permanent state of what some of us might identify as transition. Oh, he's not there yet. He hasn't gone all the way organic for 20 years, right? And so I think those farmers also, again, the idea of diversification. Some years conventional might carry organic, some years organic might carry conventional. It's just distributing risk through diversity in all tiers, right? So in terms of what label you're seeking, in terms of what crops you're growing. So just to think about it in a little bit more global way.
Okay, what he just said, there's two things that come to mind from my point of view. It's a lot easier to sell a banker if you're not going 100% into something they have no idea. Also, all your landlords are not going to be at the same time say, hey, this is a great idea. A lot of them are going to say, hey, I'll watch and see what you're doing on somebody else's farm, and then we'll look at it once you get some numbers and we can follow the practices.
So the 3-year transition to go organic is also known as the Valley of Death, which can be very daunting. Keying on the diversification side here that we're all talking about, so we've been doing this for a while, and if you're taking care of the soil and you're building a diversified business, we look at it perhaps a little bit different than a conventional banker, and I come from conventional banking a long time ago. If you're doing it regeneratively, then we will do interest only on mortgages for up to 5 years because we want you to succeed, and you're literally building collateral in the soil. We will capitalize rent in your soil building year. So that means you don't pay rent. It means your future rents will be a little bit higher. But once again, you got to get through the Valley of Death. So these are practical ways of supporting you through that process, which I think you should be aware of.
One of the things that Iroquois Valley does, and I'm not trying to do a commercial, but once the ground gets certified, they add value to it. And I have been fighting to get appraisers throughout the state, even FSA and Farm Credit or Compare appraisers, to basically show additional value on certified farms because of the additional value. Okay, yeah, that's about where I'm at right now. But when you're looking at the hard numbers on this, it generates about $175 more per year. and we look at income approach on value of farms. And we haven't had enough sales, and it's something new and different, but that tenant is making that landowner more money. So my hope is during transition, they give them breaks like Iroquois Valley's doing. So they're a pioneer, and I appreciate what they're doing.
Respond to that. We are out there by ourselves. We have appraisers from across the country call us and say, so your stock has built into it a 5% or 10% organic premium. How do you do that? How do you do that? Well, we teach the investors that living soils are more profitable and more sustainable over the long term. So therefore, you investors should pay more for that. So not too many people are following, but I think that's inevitable. That's coming.
One other thing I'll mention is in terms of financing, a lot of people go into their local lenders for operating money or whatever, and sometimes they don't understand, which I think that's common. And what I've recommended in those situations, either take some information in, and that's why I'm trying to provide it, or request FSA guarantees. FSA provides 90% guarantees. They're a federal organization, and they have a little better understanding, and they give a bank a 90% collateralized loan or secured loan. So in other words, the bank has 10% exposure on that risk. So it reduces their risk greatly, and it's a good way to get in the door.
So it sounds like the world of regenerative agriculture and diversified crop rotations, and to a certain extent organics, is a bit different than conventional. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for the farmer as a person?
Okay, I'll start out with that. I had a presentation not too long ago, and it's what your lender wants to see. And it was kind of interesting when I got done with that, I realized that bankers aren't doing a good job, because a lot of the things that we're looking at do not go into the man factor. If Will came in and said, I'm going to start doing vodka, to an average conventional ag lender, they'd say, okay, who's your market? Where's the money going to go? What's your experience? Okay, we used to in the old days look at what we call man factor, that person's ability to do things. We've got away from that. We want to run everything through a computer. And so what I'm saying is lenders have to change just like farmers. Ag is changing. We have to look at things differently, and that's a big deal. And all of us, consumers, are changing. And so from that point of view, everybody's got to have an open mind and look at situations and handle them one at a time. I won't have two farmers down the road that will be identical anymore, like we used to have. It was a nice, neat little package. But agriculture is not neat. We don't live in a nice, neat world.
I want to ask one question for a show of hands. Who in this room is farming and wants to do something different than conventional corn and soy? Awesome.
I guarantee you your cash flow will be better next year.
But the difference between conventional corn and soy and value added, it comes back on the face of the operation and everyone surrounding it. It's a total change of mindset, and you got to do legwork. And there's varying degrees, and that's going to vary based on the individual person and how much you're willing to do. Let's do some popcorn of things people are either trying or curious about as far as crops.
Shout it out. What are you trying? What are you curious about?
Popcorn? All right.
Just yell it out.
Mushrooms? Cool. Currants?
I heard oats.
Oats? Chestnuts. Nice. Barley? Elderberry. Hemp?
Bison.
Bison. All right.
I've got some interest in hops.
I'm interested in sorghum. Sweet corn. So these are all of these are food crops that go back to a food system one way or the other. And we need to grasp a hold of that and run with it and figure out ways that we can take what we're growing as farmers and feed people. And that takes all of us getting together in a room like this and there's ways of getting this done, and I don't know if I don't have any of the answers, but I mean, I like
questions.
to eat good food.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can I get an amen?
I don't know where I was
Amen.
going with that. Anyways, raise it and go package it, put a label on it, take your face and sell it to people. So what I want to encourage you to be is not a farmer, but you are a salesman of your farm. That'll get you further in your operation than just being a farmer.
All right, so I'm an introvert. I don't like standing in front of people and talking, selling myself. So if I'm that kind of farmer, where's my place in this system?
Introverts are actually probably better salesmen than extroverts. They're very directed, and they want to make sure they get in and get out as quick as possible, so they'll shoot for the sale.
So what I'm getting at is there a way that we can work together to where each farmer doesn't have to be everything?
Okay, there's a lot of co-ops that have started out on that same basis. We have a lot of people like the Midwest Co-op, and I know Dave Bishop's worked on numerous co-ops, on food co-ops. So I mean, there's groups that come together for that very reason. And one thing about, again, these types of groups that we're involved today, everybody comes together and helps everybody. We all have different strengths and talents, and we need to utilize those things.
Any thoughts from the panelists? Anything on your minds?
Yeah, just to reiterate the co-ops as well. And so I think it's easy to think about Pipeline Foods and co-ops maybe at odds with one another, but we just had a day of meetings with O-Farm before Moses, and so I think there's a lot of symbiosis between a marketing cooperative, and O-Farm is a kind of a large consortium of smaller co-ops, WOMA in Wisconsin and COPA in Kansas and buckwheat growers, and so it's an aggregation of aggregators in some ways. But they can be the voice for farmers who don't want to get out there and have to sell. And then oftentimes those co-ops are looking to markets such as Pipeline, as well as many other buyers as well. So that's grain specifically, but I think Richard hit it right on the head that co-ops are a good way to do that.
Wonderful. So I'd like to open it up to the audience for both questions and thoughts. What's coming to mind? Yes, Adam.
So there's a lot of activity around the margins, but we've got 22 million acres of corn and soybean in this state that is mostly conventionally farmed. How do we begin to really ramp this up so that we're not waiting 20, 30, 40 years for a substantial portion of those acres to transition?
Okay, I'll answer that first. About 1% of our crops are in organic. Okay, as people go in, conventional farmers go in to get their renewals done this year, and basically last year it didn't cash flow, and if you look at FBFM records for the last 5-6 years, by the time that you look at family living, income tax, and term payments, farmers did not make money on corn and beans with good yields and throughout the state of Illinois. So farmers are financially strapped, and it's amazing when you can't pay your bills and the bank says you got to do something different. Okay, people start showing up to meetings. They start to be a little more receptive. Landowners want to keep their cash rents, and they can't keep that if their tenants are not able to farm. So the finances that we're going through are actually helping organic because people are looking for other alternatives. In our situation, I probably have 10 farmers in a small bank that are doing organics. And what I'm saying by that, maybe that's 40 or 60 acres, maybe they farm 1,500, but they're trying it. And they're excited about the potential, but they understand the transition limitations. But there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of buzz, and they see a lot of opportunity.
Let me add to that. So the monoculture, as we know it, is already being disrupted. And it's going to be ugly, as this monster starts to fall apart. The scale is coming perhaps not so much from funders, but from landlords, a new generation of landlords that are inheriting huge parts, of the Midwest and other parts of the country, who are telling their existing farmers, please farm my land differently. I'm the new boss in town, and I don't want the chemicals on my land that I just inherited. That is scaling up quicker, I think, than anything else. Our farmers, we have 50 farmers or so that we work with that are organic, and they're picking up leases all over the place. And they're picking up leases that are closer to their home, whereas before they had to drive 40 miles away, to farm somebody's land organically. Now they have more choices, it's more economic, you have more infrastructure being built, it's happening. I like to say, you want to change the world, eat healthy and invest in what you eat. And that's happening. So people are eating more healthy, they're investing in what you're doing, and that is great news for this next generation that's going to change agriculture.
Go ahead.
So I think there's a lot of ways to answer this question, and I think the one way that I would answer it is in terms of messaging, right? And so I was at a convening the day before the Moses conference this year, and it was Organic 2051. And so the idea was, what do we need to do now as a collective to be able to have 100% of the acres in the United States be organic by 2051? Lofty goal, but if you don't shoot for, shoot for the stars, you're not gonna hit the moon, right? What I found myself hearing was that there's still a vilification of all kinds of agriculture that are not organic or that are not regenerative. And the question that I have is, where do you think organic acres come from? They come from acres that were conventional. We have to transition those acres, and you don't transition by telling someone that what they're doing is wrong. You transition by welcoming them. You transition by saying, we hear, to your point, Richard, that you're financially strapped right now, that things like organic are gonna look a lot more attractive at this point. And so I'd argue that our job in this room is to welcome them with open arms and work with them to do it in a better way than they might be thinking about it, better way than input substitution, better way than just scaling up 100% of acres at the same time. So I would argue that our message needs to be one of big tent, one of welcoming. I think if we keep on kind of banging the drum of monster David versus Goliath, that's important, and we can feel that. And let me just say too that I'm coming very much from the dyed-in-the-wool organic. I was cut-offs, barefoot, long braided hair 12 years ago, obviously a long time ago for me. But that's where I'm coming from. And I think over the last 10, 15 years, I've had to kind of reorient my thinking and reorient the messages that I'm using to talk to growers, because it just wasn't working for me. And I get multiple calls every week from someone saying, my neighbor went organic and I kind of don't want anyone to know that I'm talking to you, but tell me about this organic thing. And so I need to be able to say yes and not no, but here's the reasons you should do it. So messaging.
My next crop's farmers, and I'm looking for seed.
David.
Yeah, last year's Acres Conference, I heard a presentation by Reginaldo Medellin, and he talked about a couple things. One was the Main Street project going on up in Minnesota, but he also talked about a much larger project, and I think, Jay, you're involved with that, a 12 or 13 state consortium restoring agriculture in the upper Midwest. Can you talk any more about that large project, where we're at with that? How will that impact farmers in this room? What the opportunities are?
I don't think we're in that. You mean as a lender, or just as a participant?
This is Regeneration Midwest, correct?
Yes.
I think I might be the best positioned of the five to speak to that. Yes, so
I can
Ray,
talk about Main Street though. But go ahead.
yeah, Ray, he was at Moses, 2 Moseses ago, held a meeting to announce the launch of Regeneration Midwest, which the idea was that the 12 Midwestern states would nominate 2 organization representatives to convene and create a plan for moving regenerative agriculture forward in the Midwest. Since that time, it has been kind of more handed over to the Organic Consumers Association, and Ronnie Cummins is kind of taking the lead there along with some of his employees. And essentially right now it's kind of stalled out a little bit. It's a listserv with a little bit of activity, but they're still building an organizational framework to really spur it forward. So right now there are more things happening at the state levels though, where here in Illinois we have ReGenerate Illinois that is very active and very organized and hosting meetings like this to create a North Star strategy and a plan for moving it forward at the state level. We also have that happening in Minnesota and Nebraska, but the other states are still kind of in that, you know, embryonic state of development. So we're excited to see where it goes, but that's kind of the update on where that project is.
I know there's a few nonprofits here in the room. So the Main Street Project in Northfield, Minnesota, normally we lend directly to farmers. In this case, we're lending directly to a nonprofit on a mortgage basis that is training a new generation of Latino farmers to be self-sufficient in their businesses.
So other thoughts and questions? Yes, in the back.
I was just going to ask, what can be done to bring products to some of the large food distributors such as U.S. Food, Orton, Cisco, in your opinion? Like, how can you move forward in the future?
Okay, can I answer that? My youngest son is one of the buyers for Walmart. And it's amazing how Walmart used to be looking at strictly the cheapest price. They're looking at branded beef right now. And what I'm saying is the millennials are changing, and who would have thought that when you go out to buy a hamburger, it's going to be grass-fed, or it's going to be non-GMO, or it's going to be organic. What I'm saying is there are markets, and people will seek you if you have the right products. I will caution you, one concern I've got that's occurring, and we all need to be aware of this. Organics is becoming very well recognized in our society, and I didn't answer the question to the gentleman from U of I. Just the U of I getting in it and doing the things they're doing gives credibility to organics, and we're getting more and more acceptance. And I want to thank you and look forward to you guys' roles. But there's a lot of opportunities, but the problem is we're starting to see corporations looking at the profit that farmers potentially might be making, and they want a part of that. And they're going to try to squeeze out involvement from the individual farmers producing it. Please do not let that happen. That is not a healthy scenario. And there's a lot of things that are occurring. Keep the ownership and the say into the hands of people like yourself.
My experience to get into large-scale distributors has been you have to look like everyone else, taste like everyone else, and be priced like everyone else. So I've gone away from trying to get into current distribution channels and are moving forward with some food hub projects that they're going to be aggregates and places for unique products like grass-fed beef or spelt, heritage pork, anything like that that's different that doesn't fit the normal distribution channels. I know Tori's got one going on tomorrow in the Peoria area, kind of a little meeting around building a food hub aggregation point for that kind of product to get into, what do you call it, food service?
In Peoria, the Peoria market in general, how do we get more of this specifically there, not Chicago, Louis?
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes, go ahead. The lady in.
So as a farmer, and also as someone who has some background in marketing, what resonated with what you were saying was just maintaining the authenticity and integrity of our regenerative story. When we heard about what regenerative means to everybody, it means something different. And I just think about corporations hearing the word regenerative and just saying, hey, this sounds great. I'm gonna slap that on everything I buy, and I'm gonna slap her face on it, and great. And then the farmer loses again.
See, that's what bothers me right now. We have corporations producing organic, and their organic and your organic may be produced two different ways. And what I'm concerned with is we need to brand what we're doing. We need to basically have a motto or a creed or something that says, here's how we raised it. If you want to come out, you want to look at our website, this is who we are, this is our story. And I think we have to brand even certified once you get certified.
The best way that I've found to keep from being diluted is to be persistent. I'm the one that makes all the deliveries. I'm the one that helps set up new recipes. I'm the one that's there working with the buyer every chance that I get. If I let someone else slip in there underneath me, they could probably topple me over and take my spot. So being there and being the face, that is the key to keeping that.
I think there's also just an inherent challenge in something that is not actually codified in some way, right? So for USDA organic, we have regulations as imperfect as they are and as under threat as some of us feel that they are. That actually is a binary system. You certify or you don't. I think regenerative is something that, as you said very well, is so variably defined. You have regenerative organic certification, which USDA organic is a baseline for. And then you have the regenerative that Dave Branton, Alan Williams, and Gabe Brown are talking about, and that's more of a way to be able to note or add value to a conventional farm that is using more conservation-minded practices, that is using cover cropping and things like that. So it's kind of it's an anarchic term in the sense that everyone is kind of taking responsibility for it, and yet that is in some ways a downfall of the ability to be able to own or to brand ourselves. And so what's happening, and you put this perfectly, is that the companies, the corporations, the food companies, they are very much branding it. So General Mills, you might have seen, just came out that by 2030, they're going to have 1 million acres that are managed regeneratively, right? What that means, who knows? But they do have a regenerative scorecard. And so they do have a soil scientist on staff, and that soil scientist informed this regenerative scorecard, which means a farmer kind of scores themselves, and the idea is continuous improvement. So you're more regenerative year after year after year. It's a thing. It's a gesture. They're starting it, but I think, and I don't know what the best answer is, but they're already doing it. And so if farmer voices don't go right up to those companies, which General Mills was at Moses talking about the regenerative scorecard with groups of farmers, right? And so those farmers in that room, I wasn't able to be in their room, but should be able to say, this scorecard doesn't work for me, or you don't have this, or, how are you going to? The most important question should be, how are you compensating us for the practices that we are adding on this regenerative scorecard so that you don't just get to be able to take this score and make more money because you can slap it on the back of an Annie's mac and cheese box? So all challenges, I don't have an answer.
We take that long-term sustainability issue as a challenge. So as a capital provider, we have to give you capital, and we should be able to give you capital in better terms than anybody else, because you're much more likely to survive. So, and there's different ways to do that, and we try to be creative, but that's how we're thinking long term, is you've got to get through these valleys, especially in the beginning, and how's that going to happen? Well, it would be helpful that you can keep the capital, and reinvest it in your business rather than paying it back, to those that provide it.
So to summarize, I think the most important thing that we can do is continue to have this conversation and have this conversation openly, because the theme that I think has come out of this is relationships. That every piece of the supply chain, every decision on a farm is driven by a relationship, whether that relationship is with your buyer or with your customer or with your landlord or with your spouse or with your successor generation or with your farm. Relationships are based on reciprocity, and we're in a relationship with nature, and we're in a relationship with each other. And so through that reciprocity, we continue our dialogue with each other. We're part of a system, and that system has many, many different layers. And it's through the relationships we can leverage to push that system to where we all collectively see it needs to be. And part of that is consumer education, because we have to vote with our dollars. We have to be looking for the, as verifiable as possible, claims from General Mills or whomever it is. And if we start to see that they're not holding up their end of the bargain, we buy something else. Because that's what our vote is in this country. It is with our dollars, what we're buying. So with that said, I would like to thank the panel. Thank you so much for being here.